Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is Ether Amara. So in today's live video, I'm going to be discussing a topic that I briefly introduced during a kind of share of the herbal health practices that I have incorporated into my daughter's life, why I feel that it is so important for children to have a sense of belonging on this earth and in our society. As you can see in the title of this video, this is going to be discussing why it is so important for children to have a sense of spiritual belonging and why self-actualization practices are so important, especially for girls of the diaspora, Black girls, African American girls, however you want to identify yourself as a sister within this diaspora. This video is going to be geared towards these experiences that directly affect us and our daughters. So the first thing that I'm going to make mention of, as I have in majority of my videos when speaking about self-actualization, the different tools that I use, I'm always speaking about the doll theory and how doll theory really plays a huge role in the spiritual practice and self-actualization practice for girls. I feel that due to the fact that doll play and imagination and all of those things that young girls engage themselves in at young ages really gauges how they see themselves, how they sort of role play through their own life experiences. I have noticed from the time that my daughter was really young, listening to her self-talk and what she says to herself is really important to me, because those are direct reflections of how other people engage with her in spaces where she is not, with me, when she's in school, when she's, been in daycare settings, wherever she's been. That play turns into a role that is their lived experience. So I feel like it's really important for us as moms to really instill in them, that they belong here. They are human beings just like everyone else here. I feel like there is an overhaul of, it's like a power struggle when it comes to children being able to exist on this planet as themselves, as those creations of God and the higher supreme being. And knowing that, I feel there are a lot of people in the world who expect them to remain in this docile state, remain you know unspoken. And I feel like it's not fair to, even as a parent, we have no right to overhaul ourselves into our children's lives and make them feel that they don't have a purpose here, that they, don't have their own spirit, that they don't have their own soul, that they don't have anything of their own outside of being someone's child. So I feel like it's really important to instill that in our daughters, especially considering there's just so much that they get distracted with, especially when it comes to being sexualized, when it comes to being seen as, be seen and not heard. I think that it's really important for our daughters to know that they belong here on this earth. They deserve to have the same grounding practices that we do as adults. There's nothing wrong with connecting them with, something outside of themselves, being able to be out in nature and connecting with God's creations, being able to develop their own sense of style, their own sense of kinship with the world around them. And that is something that I'm definitely instilling in my daughter and giving her the opportunity to move through. We have a lot of different things that we've done, connecting her with our culture and understanding her Africanness, understanding, our Mende roots and who those women were, aside from all of the, negative things that people can say about any civilization that existed from the beginning of time. There are good things that we can highlight and there are bad things that we can highlight. But in the whole sense of spiritual valor and how to develop that in our children, I think those are the key points that our daughters need in order to feel like they belong in this world without only living to perform for the male gaze. I think that it is not healthy for our daughters to only be seen in a, as I stated, in a sexualized way. I think that really breaks them away from experiencing life, with the full breath. I think that we really hold our breath over being attractive, over what our hair looks like, and trying to seek this perfectionism from a really young age. And I've done my best to explain to my daughter, for example, when it comes to when we're doing her hair, we don't always have to do something extravagant in order for you to fit in with our society. It's okay for us to wear our hair, braided in a natural style without, requiring any extensions. I'm someone who has been really big on not introducing to my child, these fake hair, sort of practices that a lot of people get stuck in. They get stuck in this mindset and mentality that I have to have something else in order for me to have beauty. I've definitely, spoken a lot about my hair practices, natural hair practices, using wool instead of using any type of synthetic hair. I don't use synthetic hair. I don't use anything that is not of the earth, that is not authentic to who I am. And the wools that I use are very much rooted in my ancestral practices. So that is something that I've always used for my daughter. We'll use yarn, we'll use different things that are not attached to someone else's standard of beauty of what we should be doing. So when we're having, conversations with our daughters about why is it that, Black girls feel that they need to wear wigs? What is it about wigs that makes them feel so comfortable? Having those conversations at an early age is definitely something that I have engaged in and tried to get, my daughter to understand. There's a standard when it comes to how people feel we should be, and we don't have to accept that. And I think building that spiritual reverence within our daughters in order to see, like, okay, I accept me as me. I don't need those things. And if those people who feel like that's what I need in order to fit into their assimilated sense of beauty or, acceptance, then those are not my people. And let's reroute ourselves towards the people that we deserve to share our energy with. I've been in a phase and a journey in my spiritual growth period where I have had to disconnect from people in general, because there is, a lot that once you get to a certain point in your spiritual, growth in your spiritual journey, where you recognize things immediately and things, come to pass very quickly for you. So I've been in a period where I've had to cut, a lot of things and go back into my spiritual practice and really hunker down and create a system of belief for my daughter and I, as Black women who in this world, this is what we deal with. We deal with these stereotypes. We deal with people who, are assumptive in their way of dealing with us. They think that we have low self-esteem. They think that we don't have confidence in ourselves. They think that we must, be so distraught and lost in ourselves that we don't love ourselves. And I don't want my daughter to grow up living with these, stickers placed over her. You must not love yourself. I'm going to, parade you with praises to make you feel good, when what should be instilled in us to make us feel good is belonging and knowing that God created us, man didn't create us, and the way that God created us was in his own perfect image. So there is nothing wrong with you, and what other people say have no hold over what your spirit and what your soul and your life journey requires of you. So I think it's just really important to restate these things. I'm always, learning every day with the new generation, with Gen Z, and how, aloof this generation really is when it comes to girls, and how girls are just not attached to anything. I feel like when you don't assert a sense of spiritual belonging, girls are very wavering and they go all directions and they don't really understand what is it that they're supposed to be doing. We see that in the way that they, are made to dress. I feel like if we were giving them a spiritual foundation to really stand upon, they would have ownership over themselves and they would own themselves and they would say, this is my temple, this is my, this is my body, and this is what I'm going to keep for myself until I move into a point in my life where, marriage is on the table and that's the only person you should share it with. I think it's really important for girls to be redirected to templeship, to coveting oneself. And it doesn't mean that, that lessens your beauty. I think it increases your beauty enormously to know that you have templeship over yourself. You're not opening your queendom for everyone to come in and to take from. I think that giving that back to the world in it coming from the matriarch is what is so important for our society to go back into balance. I see too much, provocativeness going into, I mean, like younger groups of girls. We're talking about 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds who are picking up on these things that are coming from our feminine world, our feminine society, that has shaped their brain to believe that they need to have nails, they need to have eyelashes, they need to wear makeup, they need to have, crop tops showing their bellies and having these really shorty shorts on, and not even getting the opportunity to really even learn what their purpose is on this earth outside of being groomed up for, adults. I think that it is a very disgusting thing to have to, witness and bear witness to, especially with the internet being so open the way that it is. I feel that this spiritual practice and self actualization practice needs to be incorporated into our society in a way that will give our daughters the opportunity to live as a true queen. I think that using the word queen is a very loosely used word, but in the true sense of having that, that queenship and understanding what that means. Being a queen is standing up in your power and knowing that I'm not going to share my essence with any and everyone. I'm not going to, share myself with those that are, lesser than what I deserve in terms of respect. So I feel like it is just so important to incorporate those things into their lives very young. Like I said, I started with my daughter when she was 3 years old, and this is when she started to understand, I'm a girl. I would actualize with her, you are a girl. Starting with small sentences from the time that she was really little. I am a girl, you know, um, I have beauty, understanding I have beauty and that my beauty is for me. My beauty is my own. So I've always instilled in her that type of mentality. And we can't helicopter our children and walk through every experience with them, but I definitely know that those early memories that you instill in your children are going to move with them through their lives. So I definitely am a huge advocate about creating the spark in the matriarch, in the young matriarchship, to allow for our daughters to lead by example. A lot of girls are misleading other girls into very dangerous situations. I don't think it's fair that everyone wants to call themselves the queen and the leader and the baddest bee and all of these things, but it's like you're leading other innocent lives into essentially a hellhole where you are going to be consumed by the consumers. So I don't feel that it is fair for girls to follow other girls into darkness and just kind of for the sake of girlship just go with it. So I feel like it is so important for girls early on in their lives to be given that by their mothers. I feel that there is definitely a huge failure in mothership because I feel if there were more women who are paying attention, more women who are actually avidly protecting their daughters from, what is in this world. We know what exists in our society. We know that men can be, a number of things, but we have to make sure that we equip our daughters with the skills to know what to do if they fall into, a group setting where, boys are victimizing them because they are Black girls, because they have a set mind mentality on a stereotype that you're supposed to be, a WHORE, you're supposed to be an HOE, you're supposed to be, I've heard these things called a YH, a young HOE. And I think that when you actualize over these provocative terms that are adult words, I think it really limits your spiritual essence when you deem yourself as whores and hoes. I think that it is completely disgusting to see this generation actualizing and using those words to identify themselves with. And I feel like that definitely starts from a very young age where our mothers are not teaching our daughters that no, that's not what you are. That's not who you are. You may have had experiences in your life where you may have been objected or objectified, in a way that, no one was paying attention to. And it's unfortunate that those experiences happen, but as moms, we have to keep our daughters in our clutches and make sure that we know, I don't want you to fall into this self-actualized provocativeness where you have seek ownership over these derogatory words of yourself. So I feel like it's really important for girls to have those examples and to really get them back into nature. And, like I said in a lot of my videos, I take my daughter on hikes. We started hiking when she was, 4 years old and, old enough to steadily walk. And being out there in nature and being able to see that there's more in this life for you as the girl child than a lot of people want us to believe. So I definitely think that it is important to instill those practices in our daughters and to allow them to carry that torch on into the next, life journey with other girls that they may meet on the way. So I definitely, as I stated, I have a series where I'm talking about toxic girlhood, a lot of the negative things that girls fall into, and how important of a role women play, and why these things are happening in our society, and how we can reform this platform for our daughters. So if you enjoyed this live, I definitely would appreciate some feedback, leave some comments, like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more DIYs, recipes, and reviews. Stay tuned.